Hi, VencoreWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Thursday, November 30th, the last day of the month of November. We have a big change coming to the overall weather pattern by the middle and latter part of next week. It'll turn colder. Looks like once that cold weather pattern sets up, it'll be sustained for a while. Looks like we may be colder than normal on average from, let's say, the latter part of next week right through much of December. That, of course, would increase the odds of a white Christmas in the Mid-Atlantic region. We'll have a strong cold frontal system, it looks like, arriving Tuesday night or Wednesday time frame, likely with some rain ahead of it, mild conditions on Tuesday, and then the colder air starts to come in on Wednesday. Certainly should be in place by Thursday of next week. Let's walk through some of the changes in the upper level pattern here. The 500 millibar height anomaly forecast map from last night's GFS ensemble run. Now, one thing about the ensemble run, it tends to smooth things out as we get farther and farther out there in time. It tends to go towards climatology, so that tends to smooth things out. In other words, if you have an extremely cold pattern, it may show up better early in the forecast from the ensemble run compared to late in the forecast, where it would tend to smooth things out. Now, of course, you don't know what reality will be when you're looking at a forecast, but keep that in mind, that things tend to smooth out with an ensemble run as you go well out in advance of the present time. This is the way the 500 millibar height anomaly chart looks right now. There is some high latitude blocking going on right now, as represented here by the orange area. This is higher heights than normal, higher pressure than normal, and higher temperatures than normal up across places like Greenland. We talked a lot about high latitude blocking in the winter outlook, and in the past several weeks here we've talked about high latitude blocking because it could play a very important role in our weather here in the eastern U.S. during a winter season. In particular, high latitude blocking increases the chance for cold air outbreaks to make it from northern Canada into the central and eastern U.S. And if there is a real good blocking pattern that has set up, that cold will not only make it into the northeast U.S., for example, but it'll be sustained. And sustained cold is what you're looking for if you're a snow lover in the big cities of Philadelphia, D.C., New York City. High latitude blocking does certainly not does not guarantee cold air in the Northeast. It's one of many factors. In fact, again, we have some high latitude blocking right now, but notice the blues confined to Canada, whereas higher heights than normal, generally a quiet pattern across the U.S. So right now there is some sort of a high latitude blocking pattern, but the cold air is shunted off to our north across Canada for the foreseeable future, going into the early and middle part of next week. Well, let's now jump ahead to Tuesday morning. This is next Tuesday, December 5th, the 500 millibar height anomaly pattern, again using the GFS ensemble run. A couple things to point out. Still, lots of orange showing up here in the eastern U.S. And again, next Tuesday may be the mildest day of the next several, just ahead of that strong cold front that begins to pattern change to colder for the eastern U.S. And here is a vigorous upper level low right in this region right here associated with that cold frontal system. Could be quite an interesting cold front with a decent amount of rainfall for the I-95 corridor in the Tuesday night into Wednesday time frame as that cold front starts to develop. Still some blocking going on over Greenland and higher heights than normal to the west of there near the North Pole. And notice here also along the western coast of Canada, some ridging starting to pop up. That is a crucial player as well for an ultimate cold and perhaps stormy pattern for the eastern U.S. Well, now we're jumping ahead to next Friday. This is December 8th, a week from tomorrow. Again, keeping in mind that the GFS ensemble tends to smooth things out as you go farther and farther out there in time. Well, this is anything but a smooth looking pattern. There's a vigorous upper level trough here in the eastern and central U.S. Strong ridging. Remember, we just talked about the ridging being a crucial player if it's located right along the west coast of Canada and the U.S. That helps to contribute to a downstream troughing, which in turn usually results in some storminess for the central and eastern U.S. And notice the block setting up, and this is really a kind of a classic pattern here when you see all this orange to the north and west and a deep upper level trough right here in the central and eastern U.S. That is a classic pattern for a cold and potentially stormy pattern for the central and eastern U.S. Now, one thing we'll monitor over the next several days, exactly where will this trough line up, the axis of this trough. If it's a little bit more to the west, then the cold air, the coldest air relative to normal will set up over the Great Lakes and down across the south central PA as opposed to along the east coast. Nonetheless, it looks like certainly a colder pattern sets up here in the eastern U.S. by about Thursday of next week. And once it sets up, it looks like it'll lock in place. And again, that is because of this strong blocking pattern, higher pressure than normal over Greenland, extending west to near the North Pole, all the way down the west coast of Canada into the west coast region of the U.S. By the way, another strong trough, which is rather typical of this kind of a pattern, way out over the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean at the same time. So again, not only does it look like we'll turn colder, it looks like it'll be a sustained period of cold weather for the central and eastern U.S. Well, let's just take a look at one more 500 millibar height anomaly map. Now, this is for the following Sunday, all the way out to December 10th. Not much change. Still, lots of orange showing up over Greenland, western Canada, along the west coast of Canada and the U.S. Again, a deep upper level trough situated right over the eastern and central part of the U.S. Still trough out there over the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean. In other words, that pattern is sustained here. This is several days after the initial cold air blast, which is Wednesday, Thursday time frame of next week. Again, it looks like this could lock into place for quite a while through the month of December. Now let's take a quick look at the ensemble forecast maps for the 850 millibar temperature anomalies. This is a couple thousand feet up off the surface of the Earth. Gives a good representation of what to expect down at the surface. This is for a 5-day period. The current day out 5 days, days 1 through 5, the mean for that time period. So again, this by definition is kind of a smooth map here for the 5-day period as a whole. Much above normal temperatures here throughout much of the nation. Again, we saw all those oranges over the next few days, the higher heights than normal across the U.S., basically a zonal flow west to east. That prevents any cold air intrusion from Canada to get into the U.S. We basically have Pacific air riding across the nation over the next few days. The weekend, by the way, will not be mild here in the I-95 corridor. By no means will it be mild. It'll be seasonal, it'll be chilly, and perhaps even a little bit below normal in Philly, D.C., New York City. High temperatures could be confined to the 40s on Saturday, for example. The mildest day will probably be Tuesday of the next several, just ahead of that strong pattern-changing cold frontal system. Let's now jump ahead to the next 5-day period. And here we go, basically a complete reversal. This is days 6 to 10, basically December 5th to December 10th. Colder than normal throughout much of the central and eastern U.S. Again, this is averaged out over that 5-day period from day 6 to day 10. Basically a reversal the first 5 days. Relatively normal notice here along the east coast. And again, this will partly depend on where that upper level trough sets up, but also this is just a reflection that the first couple of days in this 5-day period may still be near normal or above normal in this part of the nation. Let's now jump ahead to the next 5-day period. And here we go. Keeping in mind that the ensemble run tends to smooth things out. Well, this is anything but a smooth looking type map. Rather extreme cold here, situated in the days 11 to 15. Again, this is the overall average for that 5-day period, days 11 to 15, which is December 10th to December 15th. Way below normal. The center of that colder than normal air seems to be setting up over the upper part of the Midwest. But again, this is very impressive for an ensemble run in days 11 to 15. So it looks like once that cold air sets up here in the central and eastern U.S., it'll lock in for a while. As far as snow is concerned, there's a possibility later next week, still too early to say. There's a possibility of some energy riding around the base of the trough that's going to set up in the eastern half of the nation, and it could set off something along the coast during the latter part of next week. Right now, that is uncertain. The cold is much more definite than the potential snow. Certainly, a cold-in pattern that locks in increases the chance for snow at some point here in the eastern U.S. going forward through the month of December. That's it for now. For VencoreWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.